The second time. It's still not the official welcoming timing, so I'm just here for fun. Let's just close this introduction session a bit. Thank you all for joining this pretty buzzy thing, but we hope that the whole conference will keep on being buzzy. We hope that you already met some people, some new people, and use the chance to keep on doing that. And then just a few last words. You have all been informed about the event Safe Space policy. Please go through it, read through it if you need to. And then there's also a bit of theory, but also very practical steps that you hopefully will not have to refer to, but just in case. There's a Wi-Fi password also written everywhere around, so please don't go around and ask every single volunteer you see for Wi-Fi password. Just kind of find it yourself somewhere on the walls. And then it would be very nice that if you're already posting about this event on social media, use some of the given hashtags and the tags just to make sure that many, even more many people in the outside world hear about the great things that are happening here. So don't be selfish, don't keep knowledge for yourself, spread the word around. And then we also have interpretation outside. You will see people standing with these super magical silver boxes. You can sign up for it and take the interpretation set, because also some people will be speaking only in Polish. So even if you do speak English, you might want to have a headset for the speakers who will be speaking only in Polish. And we were also asked by the staff to please keep the drinks and food only in the foyer. So don't bring them here in the plenary if you can avoid it. I know that many people already entered with it, so let's just not have a mass exodus now to do the kitchen stuff. But yeah, just try to refer from that in the future.
Może powtórzę to wszystko po polsku dla osób, które nie mówią po angielsku albo też nie mówią po polsku i chciałyby skorzystać z tłumaczenia. Na zewnątrz są odbiorniki, można je odebrać. Trzeba jedynie zapisać się na listę. Więc to jest moja jedna prośba. Druga prośba to obsługa poprosiła, żeby na sali do sali nie wnosić za bardzo jedzenia i picia. Jeżeli je macie ze sobą, oczywiście nic nie stanie, tylko prosimy o ostrożność ze względu na wykładzinę, a na przyszłość, żeby zatrzymać funkcję w foyer.
Yes, what she said. Super. Enjoy the conference. We will still be sticking around, trying to make this even more fun for you. And then, since we are, not here only for fun, I release the microphone to.
Okay, thank you, and a round of applause for Kasia and Vesna. Thank you for welcoming us. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Try to not hide the keynote speeches. Before I start, if Joanna Talewicz is around, that'd be good. You're expected for the keynotes. Please take a seat. Good afternoon, everyone. I will not repeat this in Polish after, ale dzień dobry. Witamy. So I'm Laurent Standard, the political director of the Green European Foundation. This is the European Political Foundation. What do? We do political education work in Europe. We partner with different political foundations. One of them, and there are many, but one of them, an important one in our network, is Strefa Zieleni, here represented by Eva Sufin Jacquemart. This is the Green Polish Foundation, who's partnering here together with another important partner, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung office in Warsaw, represented here by Kasia, Ola. Thank you for all the support. Unfortunately, the director of the Warsaw office, Joanna Maria Stolarek, is ill, so all our best wishes for recovery, and thank you again for their support. I wish to thank, before I tell you a bit more about what we will do along these 2 days, I wish to thank you all of you for being here, for being present, all the partners from around Europe and in Poland. That's the goal of such a European Academy. I wish to thank also the party, Partia Zieloni, represented here by the co-presidents and I guess many of you. Ostra Zielen, the Young Greens, as usual with our foundation, we also work with the young branches. I wish to thank the European Green Party, represented here by Melanie, one of the co-chair, and other colleagues. They have been supporting some of you as participants. Thank you again to the EGP. And I hope I won't lose my voice before the end of the day. I wish to thank also the Westminster Foundation and the Groenlings Foundation. These are foundations that help us bring other European participants to these events. Last but not least, I want to thank our colleagues from Kiev and especially the Heinrich Böll Stiftung office. We have been partnering with them since the Russian war of aggression onset in February. All my thoughts to them, to our Ukrainian colleagues working on the ground, past and present colleagues. Let me give you a bit of idea of what is the European Green Academy. And I promise I'll be short because the keynote speeches are the inspiring part, not me, but I ought to do this. For us, as a Green European Foundation, the European Green Academy has really as a goal to bring together cohorts of activists, civil society people and green activists together from all around Europe, but also very much in our transnational spirit of being in the place. So that's why we don't organize it as others do in the Brussels bubble, but we do it on the ground with our partners. So this is a mobile academy. We are here in Poland for the second time because we have decided that this was one of our focus countries, but also because this year was a special year for Poland. I'll come back to that. So the idea of this academy is for 2 days not to have an expert conference. This is not an expert place for think tankers and academic thinkers only, but a place where you can inspire yourself, you can learn from others, and more importantly, you can understand what the green movement is about, what are the ideas, what are the tools towards, obviously, elections, but also towards political life more broadly. And so that's really what we are about. I hope you will enjoy it. You will find everything in the program. The structure of the program is relatively simple. You will have a little bit of the classics, so you will have the keynote speeches, you will have plenaries, but the rest is organized around workshops where your participation is what makes this academy really a success, more than only the speakers and the experts that come. They come to feed, to inspire, to give you tools to understand what is happening, or some expertise, sometimes a reality check also. Sometimes we are a bit in our bubbles, so it's useful, but that's what they will do. We're here in Poland. This is important for us as European Greens, for Green European Foundation, but I think I can speak here as all friends in the European Green family. The last few weeks have been intense for our Polish Green movement and Polish party and all our friends. There's a bit of a glimpse of hope. I'll leave that to the ones concerned or directly concerned, but this is an important country, as you know. This is a pivotal country for Europe as the biggest of the countries on the east and the biggest of the countries joining in 2004. This is the one that has the most important border with Ukraine. This is one of the countries that has been symbolizing so much in the last 2 decades in the fight for freedom and democracy. So this is really important for us to be here. I want to thank, because none of what we do here will ever happen without them. So I want to thank my staff, and I want to thank the staff of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung and all the partners. In particular, I want to thank and ask you to applaud Alice, Alina, Kel, Kasia, and Ola, who have been making this possible. Now I leave my voice to rest, and I would like to welcome before our keynote speakers, and it's my great pleasure to have them. They've been carrying a lot of what is the hope here in the Green Movement, Ula Zielinska and Przemek Słowik as co-presidents of the party.
Thank you so much, and promise we won't be long to keep you from these great people. Welcome on behalf of the Polish Greens. Welcome you all wholeheartedly to Warsaw, to Poland, in this very, very exciting time for us. I'm so happy you could be here with us just right now, because just 5 weeks ago, Poland was pretty much on a way out of EU, and democracy not really here. And that was our reality for the past 8 years. Even with some of our amazing keynote speakers, we were on the phone days and sometimes at nights fighting for the basic rights of people in Poland. And just 4 weeks ago, 75% of people in this country went to vote, and they clearly wanted to see the change. And now we can say firmly, we back in Europe, and we back on track for democratic country that is part of the European Union and it's staying here firmly. And I'm so proud and just so happy to see you here on this day. And I wish you an amazing 2 days. Let's network, let's speak, let's build friendships. We will need a lot of ties and a lot of friendships and networks to face huge challenges we're facing all around us. But with a green family, like here in this room, we can make it happen. I hope you brought your warm clothes. Last time we saw each other as in March this year. It was European Ideas Lab with the Green Family, thanks to the foundation, thanks to Heinrich Böll Stiftung, thanks to European Greens. They're all here again. Last time it snowed, and I'm told today we can expect snow again. So that's our weather. It's November. If you're running out of hats and gloves, let us know. We will make sure you keep them warm. Przemek.
Hello, everyone. When the European Ideas Lab happened in March, and we knew that the European Green Academy is going to take place again in Poland and in November, we were thinking that, wow, it's going to be probably in new reality. We hope that it's going to be in new reality, that we're going to be host this time in a country that is, again, on the democratic side, getting ready to be back to Europe. And we are here. We can say, yes, we won, we are there. And all the ideas on all the things that we're going to talk here, that we're going to think about and we want to do, they actually, I believe, gonna have chance to happen in reality, to happen in politics. Because so far, every debate, every consultations we had basic problem that we didn't, have the stability in the Polish rights, in the Polish system that would allow us to bring the ideas, because we had to fight for the basics. Right now, I believe that the basics in the next few months gonna be established. We're gonna bring back justice and democracy, and we're actually gonna have the chance to bring into the motions all the beautiful ideas of the green reality that we want to prepare and create. And I hope that we're gonna come out from here, all of you, all of us, with those great ideas that we're gonna be able to bring into life in next months and years to come. Thank you, and see you around.
And enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ula and Przemek. Let me introduce to all of you some of our all of the keynote speakers. Thank you so much for making it here. The goal of keynote speeches are very simple. They are there to inspire and inform the way we see the world. And I have here no pressure. For amazing persons, let me start with Anna Macińska, former Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you so much for being with us. Yamina Saheb, IPCC author, and important for those of you who have been fighting that fight. She's also a campaigner against the Energy Charter Treaty. I belong to that club. Very, very proud to have you here. Melanie Vogel is the co-chair of the European Green Party and senator for the Greens in France, and Joanna Talewicz, you're president of the Stronę Dialogu Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you so much for being here, and I propose we start and listen to you. And I would like to ask you, Anna Macinska, to start. Yeah, please, a round of applause. Sorry. Floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so proud that I can share with you some ideas, and you are coming to Poland in a very historical moment, in a absolutely, well, Ula, she has just told you that it is amazing, the change which we are confronted with at the moment. So why it is so important? This election, the last election, is so important because if you realize that in the world there are more people living in an autocratic system than liberal democracy, if you realize that Poland, Hungary are two countries, there are two countries going very quickly on the way to autocracy, well, definitely we can say authoritarian regimes. After a very dreary moment in Poland, 8 years of total destroying of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And what Ula said that, well, I was very uncertain about our future membership in the European Union. Even I was shocked some months ago when the Prime Minister said, okay, we have to reconsider our obligation concerning the death penalty. Well, death penalty is not so bad. Sometimes we can use, and well, these words coming from the top, it's really, it was horrible. So immediately the Council of Europe reacted to these words, and probably you know that in Reykjavik declaration after the fourth summit, there is a very important, let's say, provision or statement that, well, the Council of Europe is a death-free zone, and there is no death penalty, and no, absolutely, we are against such a statement, of course. But, of course, for the government at the moment, it is a huge task to return to democracy. Tomorrow, we have a huge conference with the prosecutors. And imagine that there are so many prosecutors against democratic rules, against the rule of law. So it is a huge challenge. It is a huge challenge concerning all constitutional organs, constitutional tribunal, so-called constitutional tribunal, judiciary. If you realize that in Poland, or in Strasbourg, there are in the moment 485 pending complaints against Poland, only concerning judiciary. 485. So it was a horrible situation. But I'm quite optimistic. I think that we should be optimistic. But what is very important, there are many challenges. And for me, because of my previous activity, the most important issue at the moment, it is migration. Migration is not only important for Poland, but, well, it's important to other countries. And especially in Poland, of course, you can say, of course, we have Greece, we have a dramatic situation in Italy. We have also a in the Council of Europe countries, a very famous, interesting judgment of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, because United Kingdom, they plan to organize a kind of outsourcing and to send migrants to Rwanda. It is not a very original idea, because in Denmark they said, okay, it's not a bad thing to send migrants to other countries. They wanted to Rwanda, and then they said to Kosovo, maybe Kosovo would be better. So it is something what we rely on you. We rely on you that you will be quite stubborn to be, and you will ask the Polish government, and we will ask the Polish government about future Polish government, about their idea what should be done at the Polish-Belarusian border. What we can do with this horrible illegal instrument, pushbacks, which is absolutely illegal. And well, somebody can say, okay, in Europe, most countries, they use pushbacks. They build walls. Europe becomes a fortress. But even this kind of pressure, this kind of cruelty towards migrants are absolutely inhuman, and inhuman treatment should be absolutely forbidden in a country which is very proud because it's a member of the European Union. So it is also something what is quite interesting for us, and it will be probably because we have 5 minutes. So the nature. Imagine that the eastern border is so beautiful border because, well, we have Białowieża forest, which belong to Natura 2000. And imagine that because of this horrible wall, they devastated totally the nature. And then what? There is no even one voice from the Commission. Commission should initiate the infringement procedure against Poland. Nothing. 1,600 experts asked the Commission to start the infringement procedure. Nothing, no reaction at all. So now it is very important to go back not only to democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Poland, but it's very important to ask the Commission, to ask the European organs, institutions, if you want us to be, very, let's say, very rigid as far as the obligation and fulfillment or implementation of the obligation concerning the membership in the European Union is well. So if you wanted to impose very strict measures, so we wanted to ask you about your activity. You are the guardian of the treaty, and this is your obligation to look what's going on with the implementation of the EU law in our member states. So thank you so much. And well, I hope that, well, we have friends here, so I do hope that you will support our, future, let's say, activity concerning democracy, rule of law, and the respect for human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna Maczynska, for this keynote. I now pass the floor to Yamina. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I am really delighted to be here because I am a strong believer in the EU, and I do believe that the Polish people are those who will guide us to save the EU, and we must save the EU. So I am more scientist. I worked on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and what you see on climate mitigation, when you look at greenhouse gas emissions that are covered by climate policies, in our report we show that in 2010 we had 20% of global emissions that were covered by climate policies, but in 2020 we have more than 52% of emissions covered by climate policies. When I show these figures to my students, then my students say, oh, we are going in the right direction. And then I show another figure, which shows that during this period between 2010 and 2020, global emissions kept rising at a rate of 1.4% per year. So basically, then the question from my student is, we don't understand. What do climate policies do for greenhouse gas emissions? And fortunately, climate policies we have today do not reduce emissions. And unfortunately, especially for the youngest ones, if we continue with these policies, we will end up by the end of the century at 3 degrees of global warming for the overall planet, 3 degrees of global warming for the overall planet. This means there will be no life for us, humanity. I very often hear activists saying that we are going to save the planet, but actually the planet does not need us, and it will survive us, and it will be doing better without us. What we have to save is humanity from this collective suicide that we are going towards. And to do that, the EU has an important role to play, because we are leaders, because we are an important economy, and because we have the technical, the financial, the expertise to lead the world. But before leading the world, we must first be leaders in our territories. And one thing that then my student asks, so what are you doing? You have been working on these policies for 2 decades, and you come up with, well, first thing is to admit that we failed. So all the generations who have worked on climate policies failed. But it's not enough to say that we failed. We must to analyze why did we fail and how to stop failing, because we must stop failing. And one reason, there are plenty of reasons why we failed, but one important reason is that policy analysts like myself, 2 decades ago, strategy was developed to say that climate policies have co-benefits. So we try to think about co-benefits of climate policies. But today we have more and more evidence that actually it's the other way around. For example, it's the health policies that have led to reduce air pollution, and not climate policies. But we do not think it in this way from our perspective. And again, you all heard about climate neutrality, zero emissions, etc. But actually the zero energy concept was not invented by a climate policy scientist. It was invented by the US Army. And the US Army did not invent the concept to reduce emissions. They invented the concept, and I learned this, I was in Vilnius in 2016 from a very high-ranked US military guy. They invented the concept because at some point when they had soldiers in Afghanistan, they died, they couldn't save them because they were surrounded by Taliban. They couldn't save them because they did not have any more energy, they did not have any more water. And when the US Army invented the concept more than, I think it was 2008, 2009, it was about 000. Zero energy, zero water, zero waste. Yes, 000. And they had a strategy to make sure that the US Army operation will be 000 by 2020. And this is from where it came the zero. But of course, in the climate bubble, we took the zero, but we never talk about from where it came. Because we would like to have what we do as leading actually an overarching policy. Of course, for our ego is good, but for humanity is not good. And what matters is humanity and not our ego as a researcher. And that's why today we must change, we must recognize that. What matters for the people is their social rights and security rights. And that's why the EU, for example, we are leaders, if you compare the EU to the rest of the world, we are leaders in terms of climate policy framework. But this climate policy framework that we have is unlikely to deliver on the well-being of the European people. And if you take the Green Deal, for example, that we are so proud of, the Green Deal is in reality another extractivist deal for the single market. And it's not about the people of Europe. And this is what we must change. I give you an example on the Green Deal about what are the people's need and what the Green Deal is about. So, in the Green Deal, for example, we have objectives to produce X million of electric cars in the EU. But actually, as citizens, we don't need cars. As citizens, we have a mobility need. It's different. And policymakers have been, since the Second War, let's put it Second War for all the EU, although it's different from one country to another, have been responding to our mobility need by car dependency. They made us car dependent. And this has created mobility poverty. We do have in the EU fellow citizens who do not have any other option to go for their, to work or to the doctor or to school or to buy their daily food than cars. But the only solution that we have in the Green Deal, or the main solution that we have, is investing again and again in this car dependency. It has different implications. It has first an social implication, socio-economic implication, because those who suffer from mobility poverty are the low-income families in our countries, which we have locked in the policies that made them car dependent. And these people cannot afford electric car. It's just a reality. I am from France, and even in my country, electric cars are a luxury for executives. It's not for the low income. Can we make the transition with only executives? The answer is no. Is Europe only about the executives? The answer is no. Europe works only if we, all the people of Europe, benefit from Europe. And this is why what the electric vehicles, if we go with Green Deal as it is, will do, it will displace emissions. So yes, greenhouse gas emissions from transport sector will be reduced, but in practice, this will lead to more emissions in the mining industry, maybe not in our territory, so we don't care, but actually greenhouse gases do not care about administrative borders. No matter where you are emitting, they go to the atmosphere, and the impact will be everywhere in the planet. And then they will also create more emissions, for example, in electricity production. Even in a country like France, where we have decarbonized between bracket electricity production with nuclear, we will need more electricity production for all these electric vehicles. And this is not really, the full picture is not there. And this is what we do that is completely wrong. And to change that, the IPCC, our report on climate change, shows that we still have a small window of opportunity, but very, very small, shrinking every day, to do things differently. We could avoid to be at 3 degrees of global warming by the end of the century, but to do that, we must change the way we make policies. Not just to make small, and even the word energy transition is the wrong wording, actually. We must do metamorphosis in the way we design policies. And what this metamorphosis would mean to the EU, it would mean that we must bring the EU to each corner, each village, each neighborhood, in each member state. But we must also bring EU citizens to for example, to the candidate that we are going to have for the European election. So we do have an opportunity this time. We never had all the stars aligned like it is today to change the EU. And to do that, I do believe that this academy today could be the restart of your academy, is the opportunity for the rebirth of the EU. And having this academy in Warsaw, with the demonstration that you gave to the rest of the world a few weeks ago, actually shows that this is the best place to be able to give the rebirth of the EU. So let's do it all together. And let's march towards Brussels to make sure that Europe is for us. Europe is us. It's not the single market, and Europe is us, the people of Europe. And as people of Europe, what we need is security of our social rights. We are not just a market of consumption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yamina. And without further ado, Joanna.
Hello, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be here today with all of you. So I would like to also thank you for the invitation. My name is Joanna Talewicz. I represent Stronę Dialogu Foundation, which have been supporting Roma minority, including Roma refugees from Ukraine. I also represent Polish Roma community, and maybe you know that we as a Roma are the biggest ethnic minority in European Union and in current Europe as well. But unfortunately, we also are the most marginalized minority in the whole old continent. This week, I participated in the meeting of the Council of Europe Dialogue with the Roma Civil Society in Strasbourg. One of the main goals was discussing the execution of Roma-related judgment of European Court of Human Rights. We discussed issues as segregation, forced evictions, forced sterilization, and violence towards Roma. Not in the context, in the past, of the past. We are discussing about the issues that are still happening today in the 21st century in democratic European countries, unfortunately. We as a Roma, we are a very, very diverse group. It's not very often discussed, but we are. We are diverse in the context of dialect of our language, socio-economic position, also religion, culture, and so on. But there is one thing, apart from our origin, that connects all of us, all of Roma. The negative stereotypes and discrimination that all of us face, no matter which country we are a part of. Our voices are not heard enough by the majority. And we lack of sufficient power to change our less privileged position. We are minority everywhere. We are minority in every country where we have been living. It means that we don't have a political representation and we don't have enough power even to create our own image. I have worked for and with Roma for probably more than 2 decades. I have been asked hundreds of times why the Roma community doesn't want to be integrated into society. Why you don't want to learn? Why you don't want to educate your own people? Why you don't want to work? For a long time, believe me, for a long time, I answered this question by giving examples, actually examples even, how the Roma are valuable. How the Roma are valuable part of the society and underlining that we don't want to be separated from others. However, we want to respect, and we have a right to respect our own cultural heritage. Every single time when I was asked to this question, I felt that I needed to prove our and also my own worth. The events of February 2022, I'm talking about the full Russian aggression in Ukraine, I understood and I felt in a very, very, very strongly way that I should take a different approach to answer these all questions. I realized that negative stereotypes and biases and prejudice against Roma are stronger than compassion, are even stronger than humanitarian laws. Since the start of the war, Roma refugees haven't equal access to the same basic services than other refugees from Ukraine had. And today, I'm fully aware that it's not about the Roma. exclusion and discrimination are not our choices. Often we have no choice, we have no voice, and we have no influence. We also don't have even visibility. We are faced with ignorance and indifference. This is not only about Roma rights. We have to be honest, it's not about Roma rights. It's about human rights. And it's our common responsibility to have an awareness about this as well. I would like to also, paraphrase Eleanor Roosevelt, who said that democracy is only as strong as weakest individuals. We have to remember about this. I know that if we have tools and opportunities to act, we are fully included in the decision-making processes, we are able to live with a dignity. And this is something which I and my community are fighting for, dignity for Roma. Democracy is in a state of crisis. We know about this. And we need to probably reimagine it. I encourage you to join us in building more inclusive, more respectful, and more diverse society. It's not only about a better future for Roma. It's about a better future for all of us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Last but not least, Melanie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be there. I think it's really, really important that we find and create those spaces to think together, to learn together, to meet with each other. But most of all, I'm very happy that it's organized in Poland. I think this is a great signal. We are organizing this, you are organizing this academy in a country that's shown to the entire continent what democracy fucking means. And congratulations for this. In a country that has shown that there is no fatality ever, that the autocrats can be defeated, will be defeated if we mobilize, that has shown to the entire continent that the European dream is still very well alive, and that if you have determination, courage, and if you get out and vote for your future, there is something very key and very important that will happen. And this thing is change. And that's exactly what Greens are there for change. So another thing is change what and for what. And Greens have, for a long time, been understood as the political force who is there to save the planet, save the climate, and save the environment. And that's not true. I know it sounds weird to say it, but as Yamina just said, we are not there to save the planet. The planet doesn't need us to be saved. Actually, the Greens were born 14 years ago because we wanted to save the human beings who live on this planet. But all of them, and that's probably a difference. And also another difference is that we kind of realized that there was a kind of connection between the human beings and the planet they live on. We have understood a while ago that the climate crisis in reality is in itself, at its root, a social crisis. It is the consequence of an unsustainable and unfair model that exploits our common resources and that exploits the most vulnerable of us. And that forces the same people who suffer the most in terms of health, well-being, purchasing power, to pay the most to solve a crisis to which they contributed the least. So it's not double penalty, it's not even triple penalty, it's quadruple penalty actually. You get exploited the most by the system, you suffer the most from the consequences of the system, and you pay the most to fix the system that you have contributed the least to sustain. And that simply cannot go on. And that is the thing that the Greens are there to change. And that's why, and that's basically the main message that I wanted to send today, the Green project is in itself, a social project. It is not that we are green, but you know, we are also social. It's not that we want social policies because we want green policies to be acceptable. It is actually the other way around. It's exactly the opposite. We need green policies for social justice. Social justice is not the tool to have the green transition. It is the aim of the green transition. And we are doing that mostly for the billion of people who are suffering, the billion of people who are suffering from the consequences of the extreme climate event, those people whose homes are too cold and too expensive to heat, for whose outdoor works becomes more and more dangerous, the air too toxic to breathe, food less and less healthy to eat, clean water unavailable, mobility too expensive. That's what the green transition is there to solve, exactly that. So it just means building an economy that provides for all, where everyone can live a dignified life, and that is compatible with the boundaries of the only planet on which we can live today. It's as simple as that. And the thing is, it is not so difficult to do. The money to invest is there. It's just not at the right place, but the money is there. The solutions, they are there. They're just not implemented, but the solutions are there. So the money that we need is there, the solutions are there. So what is missing? What do we need? And what we need is basically just political will. And how do you get political will? Well, you get it with people, with you, with us. That's what we are needing for the green transition to work. So the EGP needs you for this campaign. The European Greens needs you for this campaign. We need to elect in 2024. And it was said, we have a small window of opportunity to make the change. If we don't succeed next year, I don't know what is going to happen. So it's not that we really have a choice, an alternative. We have to win. We need to send a majority in the next European Parliament that is going to put climate policy, social policy, and the protection of democracy and fundamental rights, that is also key to make them a reality, at the core of its project. And like it was done in Poland, it can be done at European level, but it can only be done with you, with mobilization, with courage, but mostly with you. So thank you very much. We are going to win this together.
Thank you. Thank you to the four of you. Thank you to Ula and Przemek. Thank you to the whole audience. There's a quite full room and back room. What I propose now, this was very inspiring, and this was the best transition into what is really, you know, the core theme of our academy. As you will have read in the program, there's no real idea of security and protection if there's no social justice. And you have been wonderfully explained and inspired into thinking that, you know, there is no such thing as protection and security if we don't think about the world we are in, the kind of environment. I mean, there's no conflict, there is no war without actually having behind it an environmental crisis and questions of, you know, people needing food, needing homes, needing mobility. So that's why it leads very well into our next session. Because of technical issues, we will take a 5-minute break. So I really ask you to come back in 5 minutes. We have wonderful speakers for the next session, which is the plenary on democracy and security. So that ties very well with the topic. See you in 5 minutes. And thank you again.
Merci. C'était bien?
Ouais, c'était super. Je vais préparer la suite. On se verra après.
On se verra après. Ouais. Moi, je vais peut-être rentrer parce que
Ah oui, oui, oui.
vous avez
Everyone, we are slowly starting. I just wanted to notify you again that if anyone needs translation via an audio receiver, they're available at the door. The people who took them, please remember to get them back to the box so we're not missing any. And now in Polish. Zaczynamy z powrotem za momencik. Osoby, które nie mają zestawu słuchawkowego, proszę, chciałyby o takie poprosić. Jeśli nie mówią po angielsku, przypominam, że one są dostępne zaraz przy wejściu. Można taki odbiornik pobrać. Proszę tylko o pamięć, żeby oddać je z powrotem. A tutaj już teraz Laurent wprowadzi Państwa dalej.
Now a voice over to Laurent, and he will moderate the next panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for this little break. This allowed us to have the screens around you. I hope you can hear me. We'll slowly restart and close the doors. This is the first plenary. We have two main plenaries, and as I explained, the other sessions are mainly dedicated to workshops and smaller groups in parallel. For this plenary, we wanted to discuss the questions, difficult questions of democracy and security. We have 4 speakers with us. Unfortunately, the 5th speaker, Luisa Bielasewicz from the University of Amsterdam, couldn't make it. She was tested positive to COVID yesterday, so she apologizes. We'll try we'll do our best, to cover for that. So let me introduce the speakers, and then I'll start my short moderation and explain you a bit what we are trying to discuss. Here to my left, Michael Keating. Thank you very much, Michael, for being with us. Michael is the executive director of the European Institute of Peace. To be precise. Next to Michael, Olha Nikorak, if I pronounce it correctly. Thank you so much. You are the coordinator of the Human Security Program at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung office in Kiev, and much more, but you can tell us a bit more about that. Next is Christina Kessler, together with us as both a think tanker but also an executive committee member of the Federation of European Young Greens. And last but not least, one of our board members at the Green European Foundation and MEP member of the European Parliament with the Greens EFA, Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield from France. Why talking about democracy and security? I think you have understood before that these are intrinsically linked to the situation we are in today in Europe. These are difficult topics nowadays. I think one of the things that the keynote speech of Hanna Maczynska did very well is that she started by a basic fact. There are more autocracies than democracies today in the world. When you think about security, you can think about security in so many ways. And the first question you need to ask yourself, a bit like Melanie did regarding social justice, is, what is our goal? And this is not a green reference, but it is an interesting reference. If I paraphrase Karl Popper, is what do we want security for? We want it for what? He said for freedom. I say we want it for democracy. There's no reason to have security and to be more secure if it's not for something. And so the tensions that we see today between, and sorry again for my voice today, between democracy and security are difficult political questions. They are questioning actually our society project. What is it that we want? Certainly we want social justice, but social justice comes with a certain sense of protection, being protected from something, whatever the threats. On the other hand, certainly with the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine, but not only, because let's not forget, and I'm not diminishing at all the importance of this conflict, let's not forget that there are many conflicts around the world. Security is back. It's back on the agenda. We hear about it a lot. It creates tensions. And for us Greens, it's another sort of fight against TINA. For those of you of certain generations that don't remember, the TINA was that there is no alternative. And somehow the securitization agenda that is sort of pushed and imposed upon us is back, and without a sense of alternatives. What is this security for? And what kind of project should it lead to? What do Europeans want? Come back to the keynote speeches. And Europeans are facing certainly a polycrisis. Let's not, cry too much on our own shoulders. We're better protected to face those crises than others. But clearly, all Europeans do not stand for exactly the same thing when it comes to security or even democracy, as most of the opinion polls show. So the questions of security, as Greens, as a green movement, we have been very uncomfortable, very ill-equipped to face this question. But we have to tackle it. And this is why we wanted to make it so central also. Being in Poland, this is becoming the first army in Europe, in the EU at least. It's very unfortunate, but the reality that, with the previous government, the militarization was beefed up to a very, very worrying extent. This is a very, very important democratic debate. So the question of security and the tensions is what will occupy us now. In many senses, security comes at the expense of democracy. It's imposed, it's a priority. Guns or butter, as it was used to in the past. And so that's something we need to grapple with, and that's why we have here experts, people from civil society with us to, as I said at the beginning, in this academy, walk with us into the topic and debate it with you. To conclude, as Yamina Saheb has said, we are very used to a concept of security that is human-centered. Guns, tanks, and it's all about humans. Yeah, somehow we try to save humanity. But the question of security is intrinsically linked to the question of our environment. I mean, the first threat, after all, is climate warming. But other sort of threats come with floods, with extreme weather events, but also they drive a conflict, and I think we will talk about that in a moment. What I will do now is I will leave the floor to each of you for a short 5 minutes to help us understand the situation we are in, the world we are in. That's what we are here for. And then we will directly go into a series of questions, because this is also the goal of an academy, is to debate with you. Don't worry, I have prepared some questions as well. So again, thank you so much. I would like to start with you, Olha, if that's fine with you.
So I represent Heinrich Böll Stiftung Ukrainian branch, and I cannot omit the possibility to thank all of you for all the tangible assistance to Ukraine, because the war fatigue is the most hazardous enemy of ours, and this gradual putting up with the request of oppressor is what we can face if we do not take sides. And a rogue state which rely solely on force, and the country, the population of which was ready to give their lives not in 2022, but in 2014. So it's the case of Ukraine. My background includes academia as well as policy design, but I primarily researched lawfare, how law can be weaponized in order to serve to the war purposes, and also constitutional identity, how every country treats its approach to neutrality, to national security, and especially the balance between human rights and national security. But what did I personally, as a researcher, as the policy designer, learn during the war? It's only worth fighting for and defending something that is under the constant threat.
what would be the point of standing up for democracy if we were sure that it was there for the long haul and nothing threatened this democracy? Times of challenge make us understand the real cost of living in peace and security. So people who experienced the war, and Ukrainians among them, understood the bitter truth that however desirable at the individual level, peace is not a default condition. It seems to be only a short break between the wars, and appeasement and surrender for the sake of temporary tranquility actually is worse, and it serves the purposes of the oppressor. And trust and goodwill in foreign relationship can cost lives of many civilians and independence of the state. As for Ukrainian context in terms of future EU enlargement, the common foreign and security policy as an agreed policy of the European Union doesn't fulfill its role anymore, because it's mainly for security and defense diplomacy, but in the field of trade market and financial assistance to third countries, which is really important during the peace mode, but not in the warfare as it is in Ukraine. And even though since 1999 the European Union has been responsible for carrying out some peacekeeping and policy and external actions more and more, still it actually sees NATO as responsible for reconciliation, for all the peace building, and peace building with unfortunately military means. Just imagine the plausible situation when, for example, Hungary leaves the EU, which is quite plausible, or the undemocratic governance in the United States. Then it's still dangerous for the European Union to remain without any armed forces, which actually the only country that has really capable armed forces, unfortunately, is Ukraine now. So how this concept can be addressed through the lens of the green vision? First of all, we all know about all the repercussions of the war that was caused during the warfare in Ukraine. Aside from the huge damage to the whole ecosystem of the Kakhovka Dam, there are many other negative impacts, such as almost the whole coast of the sea is mined. And also, according to the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, some 30% of the country's protected areas, covering more than 1 million hectares, have been bombed, polluted, burned, or otherwise affected by military maneuvers. Massive forest fires are spreading as the fighting continues. Almost all the territory was polluted by chemicals to leach into rivers and groundwaters. Also, there are a result of other hostilities, like bombing the civilian area, which polluted air and also water. But there are other rather unexpected implications of the war, such as for me, Putin is far more interested in lithium dominance than in imposing Ruski Mir, in fact. Ukraine's lithium deposits are plentiful, but I cannot imagine the situation when European countries will purchase this lithium from the pariah state, which will be Russia in the nearest future. And mostly all the territory where lithium is deposited is occupied. And in 2021, already European Union thought about the future cooperation with Ukraine in this regard, and lithium is crucial for our for all the batteries that can be used as an alternative to fuel and to oil. So. It is important to stand for ourselves, also for environment issues. And as unexpected as it is, and as paradoxical as it is, NATO's first Secretary General, Lord Ismay, put it like that: the business, the paramount, the permanent, and the all-absorbing business of NATO is to avoid war. And yes, it is paradoxically, but taking into account the experience of Ukraine, the very proof of capability to rebuff Russian forces would be enough for deterrence, at least for temporary deterrence. And vice versa, the alleged total weakness of Ukraine and the inability to strike back, the absence of nuclear weapons with the simultaneous huge stockpiles of Russia of nuclear weapons only inspires war without any possible collateral damage for the aggressor. And I know that these issues are rather combusting, especially for European Greens and as well for Ukrainians who suffered every day. But still, I can coin some, I can offer some concept that can be an alternative, especially for Ukraine, and to maintain the balance between democracy and between human security, which is the concept of defense-capable democracy, which was coined by the Constitutional Court of Ukraine in plenty of its decisions, starting from the full-scale war in Ukraine. And this is not a militant democracy, and the importance of this distinction is really huge, because it is this difference, this emphasis on the human rights and human dignity adherence to the rule of law and the constitutional values. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. Thank you so much, Ola. This was very interesting, and we'll come back. But I mean, I think you underlined very well the reality of the tensions between security and democracy when thinking about it, and how to reconcile them. Because the Academy is also, as I said earlier, a reality check, I pass now the floor to Michael, who has a long experience in the security sector and will inspire us further.
Well, thank you very much, and really, what a privilege it is for me to be here. I'm slightly a fish out of water. I'm not really a security expert. I've spent most of my life in the area of conflict resolution, and worked in places, in many places around the world. I mean, I think I'm basically going to make 3 points. The first is that the nature of conflict is changing very fast. The second is that we actually have quite a lot of knowledge about how to address, prevent, and resolve conflict. But the third point is the political space for us to apply that knowledge is shrinking, including, unfortunately, here in Europe. I work for something called the European Institute of Peace, and it's interesting in a way why it was set up. It was set up 10 years ago as a center of competence for European actors, the EU, European states, and civil society in conflict prevention, conflict resolution, dialogue, and mediation. And we're completely independent, but we do pay very close attention to what's happening in European politics, because clearly as the European Institute of Peace, we would like to think that we are aligned with European values in the way we go around about conflict prevention and conflict resolution. And the question that you had asked me, in preparing this this session is it time for progressives, and I assume we mean the Green Party, to reclaim security? It's a very interesting question. And does this necessarily mean being better armed than democracy, than autocracies? And my answer to these questions would be that it is very important to be prepared to challenge notions of security. And unfortunately, I think we are losing the battle on how we define security. Security is increasingly becoming defined in military and hard security terms, not in terms of what people actually most cherish, which is the rule of law and jobs and livelihoods and dignity and access to opportunity. So having said that, given that the trend now is very much to invest more and more in hard security, what I would point out is that deployment of hard security, absent a political strategy, can be disastrous. I think we saw that in Iraq, we saw it in Afghanistan, we may be seeing it in the Middle East right now, where for all sorts of reasons, hard security is displacing a political strategy for addressing some of the drivers of conflict and some of the enablers of conflict. Where you have hard security deployed as part of a political strategy, the results can be positive. And examples that spring to mind are Northern Ireland and Colombia, where in both cases hard security was deployed, but it was accompanied by a political approach that was informed by real political intent to address the root causes of violence. And those root causes of violence, I mean, because this session is short, I'm going to be saying things which are contentious, but just for the sake of brevity. Root causes of violence often come down to perceptions of injustice, of perceptions that something, that those who occupy positions of power are not accountable, that they are behaving in ways that is exclusive and that is marginalizing ever larger numbers of people. And of course, there is a big dilemma for democracies when it comes to facing conflicts with autocracies and with armed groups that are extremist. Typically, democracies are very ill prepared to do this. By the way, wars between democracies are very rare, and maybe that's one of the reasons that democracies tend to be ill prepared. But it's basically because in democracies, we tend to resolve our differences through political dialogue. We don't resolve them by resorting to weapons. But when it comes to the international stage, we kind of get taken aback that actually those forms of dialogue don't seem to apply. So democracies fighting autocracies poses huge dilemmas. So it seems to me that, you know, one of the things that we have learned over the last 10, 20, 30 years in democracies is that if you are going to fight autocracies, if you're going to fight extremism, if you're going to fight intolerance, it is extremely important to understand both what the root causes of this violence is, and for example, recognize that often legitimate grievances are corroded by economic actors, criminal actors who try and legitimize their agenda by associating themselves with legitimate causes and become mafia. I mean, Shabab in Somalia, which I know, is in danger of becoming a mafia, but it was actually started for noble reasons, a sense of injustice, a sense of, you know, and that's often true of many extremist groups. They start, but they get hijacked. So understanding what the root causes of violence are and being prepared to invest in addressing them and be prepared to invest in delinking the politics from the economics is extremely important. But my point is that I don't think that is happening as much as it should do. The question coming to try and round things off is, you know, what can the EU do to improve its peace support efforts? And I would say that this is not an easy question to answer right now, although in some ways Poland has provided one answer relatively recently. But, you know, I think the EU is going through a double take. I mean, I started my job 4-5 years ago, and the number of times I went to meetings in which people said the EU is a peace project, and basically what we need to do is export our model to the rest of the world. And it is true that the expansion of the EU has possibly been one of the most powerful ways to strengthen democracy in certain parts of the world. But actually the EU is now going into defense mode. It's no longer in the mode of how do we export our model of society to the rest of the world. It's now becoming how do we protect ourselves from forces out there that are threatening our values, our democracy, our commitment to international law. And unfortunately, there are many factors within the EU that are eating away at that. So, and I think, while February 2022 was a moment of extraordinary unity and clarity among the EU, what's happened in the last 6 weeks has been actually the opposite. What's happening in the Middle East has shown just how fragile the consensus within the EU is when conflict is more complicated than just clearly an autocracy. So to conclude, my view would be, and by the way, I do not have a monopoly of wisdom on this, so I'm very interested in hearing from colleagues what they think. But one is the EU needs to use its strengths to help prevent and resolve conflict. And it needs to be clear about what its strengths are. It is not a military actor. It is a normative actor. It has money. It has a diplomatic network. It can do things in those domains. It needs to be self-aware as to where the EU can make a difference and where it's difficult. Second, I think, is the EU can do more to fight hate and intolerance. Hate and intolerance are corroding everything, fueled by social media, and much more needs to be done. And the third thing is to maintain space, political space, for conflict prevention and resolution. That space is shrinking, whether it's in parliaments. I don't know if in the European Parliament there are still genuinely cross-political fora for addressing conflict, or whether they are fragmenting, but they're certainly fragmenting in national parliaments. The notion of bringing citizens in front of politicians, whether it's in conflict zones or in Europe, but it's also about supporting other actors who are on the front line of trying to promote dialogue, promote conflict resolution, and providing real support to them, not necessarily itself, but using its financial and normative power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Very, very clear, and again, lots of points we shall discuss. In order to give as much time as possible for the debate, I pass directly the floor to Christina. Thank you.
You earlier talked about how security is a sometimes uncomfortable topic for Greens to deal with. And it certainly has been a very uncomfortable topic to deal with for the young European Greens. So it's true, the war in Ukraine did not start in February 2022, but for us, for the Federation of Young European Greens, February 2022 was the starting point for a lot of very, very difficult and very emotional debates that we had amongst each other. And those debates were difficult, not just because as Greens, the topic of security doesn't necessarily come natural to us, and a lot of our parties come from a pacifist tradition, but it's also difficult because as a European youth organization, our members come from very, very different perspectives. And our perspectives are different depending on our history, but they're also different on where we are geographically on the map. Your perspective on NATO might be different depending on whether you have grown up in Malta or whether you have grown up in Poland. So one thing that has helped me a little bit to structure this debate and to think about not just the topic of security, but also especially the topic of security, was the distinction of two pillars that we can build off. And the first pillar is the vision. So the vision, this is where we think big. This is where we paint the utopia that we would like to see in 100 years from now, in 1,000 years from now, the world that we aspire to have one day. And then the second pillar is policy, concrete policy, which has to answer the question, okay, but what do you do today in the reality that you are given and that you might not necessarily like? I do think that it is very important to do both as a green movement. As young European Greens in the past, when it has come to security, we very often have focused on the vision, on the very big picture thinking. But come February 2022, we have realized that this is not enough because it just was not credible. In the current situation, when there are people coming to us with concrete concerns, with concrete fears that are well-founded, it is not enough to give them answers by referring to some abstract utopia that we would like to see somewhere 100 years from now. It's not helpful, and we are undermining our own credibility as a political movement by doing that. We are now doing a lot of work when it comes to the second pillar, the policy of it, and I'm really proud of that. But in all of that, I also don't want us to forget that the vision is just as important as the policy. So while right now we might be focused on this concrete, on this right now, what is the current response, let's also every now and then take the time to think about the big picture and think about the utopia and think about the world that we would like to build one day.
Thank you, Christina. And again, without further ado, in order to allow for debate, Gwendoline.
And I have so much to say on that topic. I will try to stay under the 5 minutes. Hello, I'm Gwendoline Debord-Schofield. I'm a member of the European Parliament. I work basically on a democracy package, if you want. I work on rule of law, media freedom, digital rights, women's rights, but also the future of Europe, constitutional affairs, in free committee of the European Parliament, that is AFCO, constitutional affairs, FEM, gender equality and women's rights, and LIBE, this big committee of the European Parliament that works on migration, justice, security, policy, rights in general. And I am, on behalf of the European Parliament, the rapporteur on the situation in Hungary. So most of my work this last 5 years has been to scrutinize what someone called Mr. Orban does. Security, it has been said, has come back as a very important topic, and through this term, we as a Green group, we had to take decisions on voting for example, funds for arms, and should we send these arms or not, help Ukraine on this. We had to discuss a number of things around Ukraine situation, but also before the COVID and all of this, that we were not used to. And indeed, this word security, I think that we were not using it, and we have started using it again. There's another word that we have started using, it's geopolitics. I will come back to it. And we had a bit put all of that on the side for a long time. And they are uncomfortable probably discussion for us, because indeed for a lot of people security will immediately come as people with tanks and guns, and we're not the big we don't love that very much. The Greens, you probably know, but I want to recall that a lot of Green parties are in fact bought out of peace parties in Netherlands, in England, in France, and next to Friends of the Earth or environmental groups, and next to feminist groups. Often components of the starting of Green parties were also people taking care of peace issues. I think that security, it has been said, needs democracy. That is very important. I think second, that we need to look at security in the big discussion that is starting at the moment about enlargement. And thirdly, I would like to talk about the place of Europe on the global scale. About democracy, we have numerous examples of security being used as a pretext to, in fact, break rule of law and, in fact, put people in danger. We have known this in various moments. We have known it with the nuclear issue, for example. France is a country where nuclear has meant a lot of danger for a lot of people, made because nuclear is, the future for peace, security, because nuclear threat, of course, is very good for all of our societies, as we know. We also have seen how security has meant a lot of backsliding on rule of law with terrorism. In 2015, specifically with the big terrorist attacks in France, immediately it brought up ceasefire. It brought up the time we had rules. Curfew, thank you. It brought to curfew, but we also had journalists seeing their rights diminished because of security reason. We could go and see what they were doing more closely. We had a number of people that were even more discriminated, etc., etc. But it's not only in France. We saw that in a number of countries. And in fact, terrorism was also one of the pretexts used by the member states to bring back frontiers. We had borders back in France, in EU, specifically between France and Italy, but in a number of other places because of the threat of terrorism. And we've seen this again lately because indeed certain Central Eastern countries are using also the question of security to say we should put the borders back in. So we see that this tension exists a lot. We have seen also that the question of autocracy, the question of disinformation around the Russian topics and the Russian interference has meant that we have often started criminalizing civil society. And there was this plan of a democratic big project of EU, democratic plan for EU, where one of the big concerns that we had was that one of the projects of the Commission was, for example, much stronger rules about a civil society and much difficult rules for them, because maybe civil society would be one of the ways of the Russian to enter into the European debate. So we see that in all of these cases, what we need to do is to be careful every time that it is a pretext to, in fact, diminish liberties and civil rights, because, of course, civil society are also the main empowered powers in countries to bring up European values and to have and to uphold democracy and then to uphold security. On enlargement issue, we have seen there again that we've been talking about enlargement again because of Ukraine and not for good reasons of, the Balkans, Western Balkans belong to EU and we should help the society of Western Balkans to get to democracy and we are happy to work with them. It was the threat of Russia that brought the discussion back, and there again it could mean that we do the enlargement package in a very bizarre way where we go directly to Ukraine, we ignore the Western Balkans just because we want security with Russia and next to Russia, and we're not doing the work in deep, and there again empowering the civil society. We have seen also that foreign interference has been a pretext to there again dismantle a number of things and a number of liberties, and we have seen that energy security has been used also to once again stopping a certain number of things. We also have seen that the war has been used to stop try to stop some environmental and the climate deal and that sort of things. Last thing on the place of Europe in the world, we are in a moment where indeed we don't really know what we want EU to be anymore. We are not fighting for our values. We have more and more national identities topics being used once against the others. We are also not talking in one voice, and when we do talk in one voice, I always have the feeling that it has a very bizarre biais. One of this, why do I say that? It was very clear with Ukraine, we were all solidarity and very united, But when indeed the problem aroused in Middle East, it was really not the same. And I do think that there is something about the fact that Ukraine is a Christian country, and it was much easier for all of EU to be very solidary in this fact. And we also saw that with the issue of migration. We opened very easily and welcomed the Ukraine people, and that was really good, but we have never managed for all these years to welcome anyone that comes from the other side of the sea. So we don't know what we want to defend for this EU, and we could become this single market that is stronger and more masculine in its way of seeing the world, and really fighting against China and Russia and putting itself next to USA in this very bilateral way of seeing the world, without going on working on our values and saying that what is also the true identity of EU is that one of the things is that in EU you have Charter of Fundamental Rights, you have Article 2 of the treaties, and what defines EU amongst a lot of other things, but one of the core things is that in EU you can be whoever you want to be. You are not defined by your color of skin, you are not defined by your sex, you're not defined by your sexual orientation, political opinions, etc., etc. And this is something that we rarely say outside of EU. To not be more longer, I think that we should also tackle one topic specifically. It's the gender perspective. We have seen in a number of cases that when we forget the gender perspective, then we also make mistakes. I am always very surprised that in the dialogue that we've been doing all these years with Western Balkans in the enlargement process, there's very little done on what the women had to suffer during the conflicts in the Western Balkans and how it has probably traumatized societies and created violence. And then we saw it come back with Ukraine, and once again we are not challenging it. On the energy security issue, there would be a lot to say about the fact that women will be the one suffering the most, and we are taking at the moment big decisions that will have huge impact for the women. It was said earlier also about the cars, this question of having cars, clean cars. Yes, there is mobility precarity, and women are the ones suffering the most about mobility precarity. So we have a number of issues. When we forget, we just go into the social aspect of it, and we should do. Social justice and the environment should go together, but when we forget the gender aspect, we also miss huge opportunities to improve things.
Thank you, Gwendoline. Because I'm very aware of the time, I do have questions. But what I will propose, because we have other sessions after and we run a little bit behind schedule, is to move directly to questions of the audience, together with some of mine mixed in the bag. So I would like to see a few hands raised. If you have questions, please do not be shy. This is an academy, not an experts conference, I repeat. And then we will wrap them up for our speakers. And I believe we should have a microphone somewhere circulating. No, we don't? All right. So we have one question here in the center. Please do raise your hands already if you have questions so I can see them. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Luca. I'm from Italy. I'm from the Italian regional co-spokesperson of the Italian Young Greens. So my question is for Michael Keating. It was very, very interesting intervention. And about the sentence you said that made me think that there is this sort of tendency to say, okay, we need more peace, let's spend more in our armies. But today we have sort of like European armies of all the countries basically spending even more than like 3 times Russia. We have the United States spending 12 times Russia. So and today we have around 180 wars like around the world. So I wanted to ask, what's the percentage, in your opinion, of course, in general, the percentage in which that spending more is actually contributing to more peace, and respect to having, for example, more autonomy in the sense of developing our renewable energies, etc., like being independent in that way. So, so which one is the percentage on both? Like either spending on more armies or maybe thinking about our policies in terms of energy, in geopolitical independence, and so on and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. I'm looking at other hands raised. I've seen a gentleman here, but to ensure that we go for not only gentlemen on security, please. I'm looking at other hands. Nothing for now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Mads Nikolajsen, Green Left Party of Denmark. Thank you to all introducers for very interesting speeches. I have a question to Gwendoline Delpo Caulfield. I don't know if it's correct said, but never mind. Because you are representative in European Parliament concerning Hungary, and you revealed very much about Hungary, autocracy of Hungary. There had been a coalition between Hungary and Poland, and that coalition is over now. But you have also revealed that Hungary is a kind of coordinator of autocratic movements all over Europe. Do you think it's possible to weaken that coordination, to weaken Hungary in this network of autocracy because of the Polish election and change? Thank you.
Thank you. And I have one last hand for this first round. The lady at the back. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ariadna. Do I have to stand up?
You
okay.
Don't have to.
So my name is Ariadna. I come from Barcelona. I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations again to the Polish for like 2 weeks ago. My question is more in a gendered perspective of security. So basically, what in Spain, some years ago, we had the first defense minister, who was a very young woman who was pregnant at the time. And we have this image of a young pregnant woman leading the army and all the generals. And that was causing kind of an image shock, no? Because that was not common. But this also opened an identity politics question, because of course we need more women in these leading positions, but do we need more women in the army? Do we need the army to be led by women? Or instead we need to feminize the way in which we understand security? Because of course I'm realistic, and I know that we cannot all of a sudden say, okay, so we're not gonna like just have an army, because that's not sometimes the wisest solution. But if we want to like make a stronger security, but make it feminist at the same time, like how can we make this compatible, basically? And whoever who wants to answer, I'll be happy to listen to the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now pass the mic to the different speakers. I propose to start with you, Michael, because the first question was, if you can pass the mic, thank you. And then we'll go around.
Okay, it's a very difficult question from our Italian colleague, but the first thing I do want to say is I was at an event in Brussels on Monday at which Annalena Baerbock spoke about European feminist foreign policy. And, you know, what she basically said is that, I hope I'm being respectful to what she said, but she said this is about putting the human person at the heart of security. And actually it's much more difficult than you think. Listening to the experience of women and indeed young people and civilians generally, and trying to figure out how what they are saying is then translated into security policy. It sounds like apple, what's the word, you know, apple motherhood and apple pie type stuff, but it's really difficult. And we have direct experience of this in places like Yemen and Somalia, where we've taken a lot of time to listen to what women are saying is driving conflict and what can get them out of conflict. And what they say it's very difficult to cut through to politicians and power brokers who are interested in weapons and money and are not interested in what they say. And that's why I'm saying that creating political space for conflict resolution and security, making sure that people are at the center of those things is so important. In terms of the question from the Italian colleague, you know, I don't think there's some magic percentage that is, you know, represents some kind of ideal balance between investment on security and investment on other things. And I'm slightly uncomfortable because security is not just about hard security and armies. Security is a much broader concept. And even if you take the hard definition of security, are you talking about armies? Are you talking about police? Are you talking about intelligence? I think policing is often underestimated as a form of security. It's actually much more meaningful to most people than having armies. But this clearly has to be a national decision. That has been perverted somewhat by the Americans insisting upon everybody spending 2%, which creates some kind of artificial, you know, number. But essentially, I think it sounds slightly lame, but the answer has to be, you know, what you spend on hard security needs to reflect what you consider to be the best way to respond to the drivers of insecurity. And if you decide the drivers of our insecurity are terrorism rather than injustice, that takes you in one direction rather than another.
Thank you so much, Michael. Olha, you have the mic, so I invite you to respond, and in particular, some of the comments were made about, you know, what is security for, and in the response of Michael is very interesting because. You know, the very definition of security is what you fight for. And if you could elaborate further on the idea of defense-capable democracy, that would be very instructive. I find this concept quite enlightening in the context of this discussion.
I will start probably with the gender perspective of hard security in Ukraine, because, for example, a Vice Minister of Defense in Ukraine was a woman. Also, but still, males prevail in this hard security field in Ukraine. But, for example, as for the armed forces, starting from 2014, there were 16-17% of women among armed forces in Ukraine. But with the beginning of full-scale war, because of the conscription, this percentage was lower, and now it's 8%. But for example, the quantity of women officers who were holding higher positions were 2.5 higher. So, but I can only agree with Michael that concept of security is far broader than just hard security, and it includes a lot of different dimensions. And in Ukraine, the war caused probably two important perspectives in internal and external policy. First of all, in external policy, what is the meaning of neutrality now? Because neutrality is not the same as a non-belligerency. And in case of Ukraine, a neutral state has to treat opposing states in an impartial way, but for example, if to treat Ukraine, which is a rather young state, and a powerful Russia, it only serves to the purposes of Russia, actually. And the main international tool for neutrality is Hague is Hague Convention number 5 on the rights and duties of neutral powers and persons, and it was signed actually in 1907, so it was 116 years ago, before the two world wars and before the hybrid warfare. And at that time, war was only about bloodlust, about conquering equal states, and about more and more resources. And now, for example, for Ukraine, the war is existential. It's for our identity and for our right to live at home. So it is important to think over this concept of neutrality and how to take sides in such cases, for example, because the last two legal documents that were adopted and entered into force regarding neutrality were adopted in 2009 and 1994, and it concerns actually manuals on international law to armed conflicts at sea and to law applicable to air and missile warfare. So it only concerns specific norms about new types of weapon and not about reassessment on the concept itself. And as for internal policy of Ukraine, this is this balance between human rights, which are obviously restricted in the wartime, and especially according to the martial law, and between the national security and national interest, because actually, for example, rights of people to move freely, curfews, for example, or closed borders are limitation of human rights, but they are necessary. And here the demarcation line is the principle of proportionality. Whether these measures are necessary, whether these measures are legal in the democratic society, and whether this is the last resort to win the war.
Thank you, Alha. If you can pass the floor to Christina, I'll profit from the fact that the last two speakers here to my right are European Greens, to ask you to respond maybe to the different questions, especially from two angles. The one that was cited in different ways is the fact that the EU is a giant in terms of defense, but it is actually not a military force. It's a giant. I mean, it has 27% of the defense market of the world. It does spend way more than, as it was said, than Russia. It is just behind in terms of capabilities behind the US, and yet it is not a military actor. It's not an army, and certainly not in the context of NATO, which I'm sure you will invoke as good Greens that we are. So that's the first part of the question, referring to what was said. The second is indeed the question of security. For most of the Green movement, it seems obvious. You know, people go like, well, it's obvious security is everything, it's holistic, it's way more than hard security. But once we get into the debates, as we do now, we often get lost, because I mean, very quickly we'll talk about military, very quickly we'll talk about hard power, and we will tend to forget the rest. But as most, even international relation experts will say, there's external security, and there is no such thing as external security without internal security, just because you will breed onto an instability, domestic instability, if there's no internal security. And so therefore those other dimensions. And I would like you to obviously take up the challenge to answer as Greens to those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will also answer the questions. On the first question, so a week before the election in Poland, I was in Budapest for the Budapest Forum, and we were all quite depressed because we were expecting the majority of peace to shrink a bit in Poland, but basically that was it. And not only did it shrink, but in fact it was a clear win against. Just to say that Poland is a hugely good news, and it's not only a hugely good news, it also shows something that I really believe in, and that's why we called the event that we're doing tomorrow in that way, the participation of women and youth. If you do mobilize people, you have progressive societies. Surveys show that the Polish society was no more homophobic or feminist or less feminist than another society. But in these last years, women were dying because they had a dead fetus in themselves, and we were thrown back 70, 80, 100 years earlier with women in a hospital bed, letting to die for 3 days by doctors that decided they could not get involved, even if they knew that this lady was poisoning herself. And that was in EU 1 or 2 years of it happened sadly a few times. But the Polish society was not a less feminist society than others, and I think that they proved it very well, because these women, they went to demonstrate week after week for months, for years, getting beaten up and all of this. So they showed it. The Hungarian society is not more racist than another one, and there again, LGBTI laws today in Hungary are awful. Anti-LGBTI laws are awful, but people don't really care about LGBTI issues. They are exactly like like us. They think, I mean, you do have people brainwashed, but most of the Hungarians have no problem with all of this. And you could repeat that everywhere. In France, surveys shows very clearly that people are much less racist than they used to be. And then there is a huge possibility that in 2027 you have a far-right government in France. I think it's getting closer and closer, and we're not fighting well against it. Why? Because we're not mobilizing on the other side, not because they are getting that stronger. Meloni's results are very interesting. Meloni, in numbers, didn't do that much more than last time. There's a transfer between Salvini and Meloni's votes. So, but if you take the total number of them, it's not that worse. It's just that on the other side, people didn't go to vote for the progressive forces. And the fact that you got this 70% people voting in Poland, and so many women and so many youth, and these people also before the election going to mobilize, and the civil society being so involved, all these NGOs that did so much work next to the political parties, that's what made the change. And that's the only solution that we have. I don't see another one, and I really think that because institutions are failing us, citizens are the ones that are going to win the battle. That's clearly the case. For the moment, the European institutions are failing us, and they are failing us repeatedly. I really thought that we had a breakthrough in the last month, and I can see that we don't have it, so institutions won't act on Hungary, because the only thing that you need to do today is to just withdraw the voting rights to Orban. That's the only solution. I mean, the conditional mechanism, I always said, was a good thing to protect the European money, but it was not something that was going to resolve in a miraculous way the systemic rule of law issue of Hungary. But on the other hand, the day that this person cannot vote at council every 2 months and make a big influence on political policies, European policies, that will be a real. And you know, if we withdraw the if we withdraw the voting rights to Orban as a sanction, it will not affect the population. It's not the Hungarian people that will be affected like they are today by a number of laws, of decisions that we had to take. So European institutions are failing, but citizens are the ones that need to fight. And I think that when we do that, we are strong. I think that Orban showed the good example of managing. UK was the bad example, so everyone knows today that you should really not exit EU. You should try to use it as a single market with taking out its core values. That's what Orban showed. Meloni is taking the same way. So yes, there is a bit of coordination, to answer your question, and it is difficult to fight it, but it is true also that they don't agree amongst them. Meloni is not happy about... Hungary today doesn't take any migrants, not one. It's the only country that manages to every day push back all of its migrants. What does that mean? That means that all the others are getting them. So even in between them, they're not happy. I mean, we were very afraid that Fisco would become a new piece and that we would have an island, Slovakia, Hungary, instead of Poland, Hungary. But Fisco is really, really annoyed with all these people that Hungary are getting to Slovakia. And Meloni has clearly stated that she's unhappy with the fact that Hungary is one of these countries that is preventing the question of migration to be challenged, and that Orban is not helping it in taking its share. And I think that the question of the migrants, the migration is one of the core questions, and until we have not tackled that one, I think that indeed we have a problem still, that the far right can be strong, but I still think that when we fight, we manage. On the feminist issue, I think that a feminist foreign policy is indeed a policy like all the feminist policies where you put the focus on the fact that you have more women representatives. So indeed today, in the field of hard security, you don't have a lot of women, so it does help to have more representative, of course. It does help to, it would be also a solution to work on certain topic, as I said. I mean, rape as a war instrument is a topic that is not working enough on, and we have seen repeatedly in the Balkans, in Rwanda, in Ukraine, that it's more and more used as a war crime. So this, if we had more women, maybe we would have more of this gender perspective. And there's a number of other topics that would need to be worked. But that being said, the problem, I think, with hard security is that you always come back to this thing that there's no criticism possible in hard security. When you do a war, you don't take the time to discuss, did my commander-in-chief took a good decision or not? The rule at the very core of army is obeying, and that is, of course, the contrary of a feminist policy, and that is something that I think that's where I'm not sure there's really a possibility for a feminist way of doing war. I think we should avoid to do war, but we don't manage all the time.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Christina.
Just a few words to add on the EU as an actor on security. I think this taps nicely into this idea that security is not just security and defense, right? Because yes, the EU, if you frame security as solely an issue of defense, then the EU is ill-equipped to deal with. But I do think with all that you said, completely true, and the current political realities are really not working in our favor. But going back to the utopic thinking for a bit, the EU, because it covers so many areas and has so many competencies in different areas, is actually really well equipped to provide us with a perspective on security that is broader than just defense. So other areas of security that are not just military defense, the EU actually is in a much, much better position to address those than a traditional military organization, I would say. To the feminist foreign policy, yeah, I do think when we define feminist foreign policy as simply more women in positions of power, that is incredibly reductive, and it's leading us to a sort of girl boss feminism that is not really the kind of feminism that I want. I personally don't believe that women somehow are inherently the better people, and I do think women are capable of cruelty just as men are, and I don't think our world necessarily would be a better place if all generals were women. That being said, I do think changing our institutions towards cultures that are more diverse and more open to different opinions is an important part of feminist foreign policy. And then, of course, there is the issue what we already talked about, putting the focus on the perspective of people directly affected. And here, just one thing to add, because a lot has already been said, but I also would like to add that because I think it's not just women, but it's marginalized people in general. So that's women, yes, but it's also children, for example. It's also the queer community. Marginalized people in general should be the focus of our thinking on security. And this is how we get to a truly human security, which to me is a feminist security policy.
Thank you, Christina. I'm aware of time, so I want to give you last round of questions for a few hands. Please be brief, and we will ask the same from the speakers because I want to respect the next workshops. 1, 2, 3. After the session. Sorry. Yes, please go ahead. We have mics, please.
Okay, Katarzyna,
yeah, please start.
Katarzyna Neklimowicz, Text of Europe. I just wanted to give a short comment and maybe rephrase the question that I think was brought by Michael. How to protect our democracies from authoritarian regimes. Shouldn't we ask ourselves instead how to democratize our systems so that we don't fall into the trap of authoritarianism and dictatorship, as we have the whole plethora of democratic innovations that are already tested and ready to be implemented, including different models of horizontal governance, collective online decision-making platforms, and participatory processes that are reinforcing the deliberative approach, so democracy based on constructive dialogue, looking for consensus while having in mind diversity of alternative and constructive solutions. So instead of investing in weapons and armies, shouldn't we invest in democratic innovations, innovating our democracies? As Michael, you also said yourself, that strong democracies are less prompt to getting involved in armed conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have two questions here on the other side.
Hi, thank you. So thank you so much for your contributions. I'm Florian from Vienna. I'm a local councillor. The first question would be for Michael. You mentioned earlier that the space for debate would be shrinking. I think that I would agree, and I just wanted to get your opinion on how we could keep it open. And the second question would go for Gwendoline, since you said that you would be working on constitutional affairs also in the European Parliament. I would be interested in your opinion on how you would actually organize security and defense as a European. Would you keep it on the national level, have it on the European? What would be the realistic approach also? Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. And the last question, yes.
Yeah, I have two kind of related questions. So the first one is, what are your opinions on conscription? And secondly, in Austria, we have conscription, but we also have the option of like alternative, like sort of civil service. And a lot of more right-leaning people choose military service, and a lot of more left-leaning people choose like the civilian alternatives. We also see that the police is deliberately like advertising new employees on more far-right newspaper sites rather than more neutral newspaper sites. And we see that more far-right people buy a lot more weapons privately as well. So how do we kind of deal with far-right people becoming more weaponized, and at the same time the like public armed forces also becoming more right-wing?
Thank you so much. And sorry again for the other questions. We have limited time. I shall remind you that the program is far from over, so there are other sessions. For those interested in those questions, there are 3 parallel sessions after. One of them deals specifically with the questions of defense and hard security, and the different green visions is based on a study that we have commissioned. I turn to the speakers before I close. Same round. We had a mic. Yeah.
So if I understood the first question correctly, it's not so much how to protect democracies from autocracies, but how to democratize, in a way, autocracies. And this is a very difficult question. But the first thing I would say is we're not good at it. The number of conflicts that have been fought in the name of democracy, bringing democracy to Iraqis, bringing democracy to Afghans, bringing democracy, and there's something very arrogant about it. And there's something that reveals that we haven't necessarily understood the societies and countries, and we presume that our model is appropriate for others. And I was mentioning this at the beginning, the export of the European model. Much better is to understand how these societies consider what they consider to be accountable government, and to strengthen that with a view to ending up with democracies. I think every society in the world believes in accountability, but they don't necessarily express it through elections and democracy. And by the way, we haven't touched upon this, but elections are highly problematic as expressions of democracy, both in our own countries, but often in many other countries. They are incredibly abused. You look at Afghanistan, you look at Somalia, you look at so many places where we've been supporting elections, and they have either increased violence or not resulted in democracy, let alone accountability. So I think it is a good idea in the big scheme of things, but I think a degree of modesty is required. And the most important thing, in my view, is to invest in accountability to people, to civil society, and respect the way that has been done in many countries around the world. And then the other question I think directed at me was about the space for debate is the political space for non-violent conflict resolution is shrinking. And the short answer, in the interest of brevity, is we have to make the case. We have to make a much more powerful case as to why non-violent conflict resolution is as cost-effective as using military and hard means. By the way, I think there's space for both. I mean, if you are confronted with a military invasion, you don't start talking about non-violent responses. You have to be prepared for that. But the case for non-violent conflict resolution is very weak. And as I say, I wonder, talking to terrorists, for example, people don't like it, politicians don't like it, and yet we know that you have to talk to people. You have to talk to people. Is there real political space in the European Parliament to help organizations do that? I doubt it. And so the answer is we have to make the case, which is an economic case, a political case, an ethical case, a legal case, a moral case. And we don't. And we just got to be much better at it and broaden the coalition of actors who understand why keeping that space for dialogue and non-violent conflict resolution open is so important.
Thank you, Michael. Important in this discussion that you just brought in. We haven't brought it, but maybe for the rest of the academy, is the fact that the imposition of democracy, no matter what you even think about democracy, is sometimes a beautiful demonstration of the fact that we haven't in Europe decolonized our own security thinking. One of the things that makes us not able to access what others have to say is also the fact that we have acted as a colonial bloc, and that is not to criticize all the EU member states, but to say that the mindset also hasn't changed much. Olha.
I can answer two questions. First one about the conscription, because it's a very alarming issue for Ukraine now. I assume that majority of Ukrainian males will prefer to build roads than to be killed during the war. And we tried it. We tried to avoid this topic for 9 years, but unfortunately we have no other choice. And that is connected with the other question about the capacity and capability of democracy instead of going to war. We tried it as well and we failed, because even according to our regulation of the armed forces, the muzzles of weapons should be pointed downwards, indicating the willingness to defend, only to defend, not to attack. We tried to speak Russian, for example. We tried different ways of communicate with terrorists, even during Minsk negotiations, for example. We also tried any armistice and any truces, but we understood on the 24th of February in 2022 that it will lead only to a bigger quantity of casualties. So yeah, it's better to be well equipped with democracy tools, but to be always aware and ready to defend oneself.
Thank you, Raha. Chris. Thank you. Christina and Gwendolyn, please keep it short, sorry.
Yes, I'll speak to the other aspect of the conscription point, because I'm from Germany, and as some of you might know, Germany also has a bit of a problem with far-right groups in the German army. And yeah, this is obviously the problem if you have an army when there's no conscription, so the only people who want to join are maybe the people who are drawn to a certain culture that already exists in the army, and then maybe it's those people, especially that as a citizen you would prefer not to be equipped with guns and not to be in the army. So I do think this speaks very much to what we were talking about earlier, like changing our culture, changing our institutions, because yeah, I think especially in police, in military, there really can never be any kind of tolerance for people who are not behind the values of our constitution and behind democratic principles. I don't think that conscription is necessarily the answer to tackle this problem, but I do think this is something that urgently needs to be tackled, and I do think this is also actually a very good example of what a constructive green security policy that focuses on defense can look like. Because, for example, if we say, okay, we see that abolishing our military altogether is unrealistic for the next 100 years or so, then we accept, okay, there is a military, but maybe we don't have to accept the military as it is in its current form. Maybe we want to be there certain rules in place, a certain way our military should look like. Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Gwendolyn.
Yes, so we don't have a clear position that is completely unanimous in the Green Group on this. Very clearly, more and more of us are convinced that unanimity for any topic is just blocking and problematic. If there is one question that will stay until the end for the Greens, maybe the one where we could accept unanimity, it would be indeed the security issues and going to war and giving arms and all this. But I think that even on that, we are more and more convinced that a very strong qualified majority would still be an answer. Then, of course, I mean, the facts have shown in these last 2 years that we need harmonization on how the money is used, because as it has been said, there's a lot of money, EU represents a lot of money in arms, but it's not useful. It's just France adding up and its own things, and the others adding up their own things. I'm talking about France because it's one of the biggest. These arms cannot be coordinated. We know that the Ukraine people had to be formed to 5 different styles of tanks and 5 different styles of organizing the guns and all this. So very clearly that is a very easy thing where stupid sovereignty is really blocking us. We need sovereignty on a number of democratic decisions, but we don't need sovereignty for each member state of EU to have its own very specific way of constructing its tanks or its guns. So that's a very simple answer.
Thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you, everyone. For those interested in those topics, as I said, there is a session right after where we'll also talk about conscription, I'm sure. I think I will try to end, because we are late, on a actually very feminist slogan, which is reclaim. If you have listened to the speakers, and I have listened carefully to your questions, if there's one thing that the Green movement can do, is to reclaim the question of security, to own it, to diversify it, and to bring it back into the realm of democracy, rather than, as we have heard, leave the hard security, the police, and other jobs and other sectors to the other political forces, and therefore to other parts of society without it being democratic. So I think the political debate here was very useful, at least from what I can see, and definitely the question of security has to be back on the green political agenda. Thank you so much, and good continuation with the Academy. Thank you to the speakers.